Hello, everyone that is joining from all over the world. This is so exciting to see so many of you joining live. My name is Izzy, and I am a member of the Association of Master Herbalists. I arrange sort of the educational CPD for our association. So we are a UK-based association for herbalists, and I am so delighted that we have Josh Williams joining us tonight. So I'll do a quick intro, but probably best to start with housekeeping. So as there is a lot of us, we'll keep you all muted if that's okay. And Josh will be doing a full presentation for us. And I'm so excited because he is so generous and abundant. He will be giving us the slides. So do not worry about taking notes. There's a lot of information in there, and I'm really excited for him to get going. Secondly, if you have questions as he goes along, we will do the questions at the end, but just type them in the chat box. And if you put question first in sort of capital letters, because I know there might be lots of other chat going on, but then it'll be easy for Josh and I to identify the actual questions you want us to answer. And I think that covers it for housekeeping. And also you will all be getting a recording of this. And even more amazing, I'll let Josh talk about it, but he is going to be sharing a super special ebook with you as well. So thank you so much, Josh, for being so generous with your time. So I'll do a quick introduction about you. So Josh Williams runs a successful clinical practice and herbal apothecary near Salt Lake City, and he's an inspired and dedicated teacher of spiritual herbalism with over 20 years of experience, and has studied under many celebrated herbal elders, including Paul Bayel, Susan Weed, Cami McBride, Michael Tierra, and KP Khalsa. Legends, all of them. Josh is also a founding member of the Utah Tea Guild and the Wasatch Herb Festival and the Green Art Tradition. And I'm so excited because he's also launched a whole book for us to learn more about the practice of spiritual herbalism. And it is on sale now in the UK through Aeon Books. I'll put a link in the chat. So if you want to hear more from Josh, he'll share more on it later, but we have got a special discount code, which is 20% off, which is valid till the 31st of January, but I will let Josh talk more about the book during his presentation as well. But it's I've put the code in the chat and I'll send the link once I've finished talking. But yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Josh, and I think we'll make the presentation will last just probably under an hour, and then if you've got time to stay, we'll do questions afterwards as well. But if you don't have time, it's fine, because we'll be able to send you the recording as well. But yeah, thank you again so much for joining, and I will hand over to Josh.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try to, what am I going to do? I'm going to try to turn my slideshow on here. There we go. You got it?
I'm muted. Got it. Yeah, I can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us today. I'm incredibly honored to be here. I wish that I was in the UK in person, but I am here at my apothecary in Salt Lake City, Utah, joining you remotely. And you know, that's just the way of the world these days. So we'll pretend like we're all together in one space, covering every time zone in the world somehow, and get into it. So what we're going to do today, with hopefully being very efficient, because we have a lot of information to cover, a lot of journey to take. I want to talk about evergreens, lore, magic, and medicine. And I'm trying to just battle with, there we go. We're going to talk about the spirit of evergreens, how they show up for us in this dark wintertime, midnight of the year, as allies for medicine and magic and lore. And we're also going to spend time looking at just five of my favorite evergreen allies. I will tell you, as a sidebar, that I had to narrow this down from about 15. So it was very difficult for me. It always is. I love all of them equally. So we have a sampling of 5 evergreens to talk about today. And along the way, we're going to discuss lore, medicinal virtues, magical virtues. I'm going to give you some recipes and some ritual applications for some of these incredible allies. And we'll see kind of where the journey takes us from there. So first and foremost, I'm in my own way with the camera here. What makes an evergreen, right? We have so many of them. Evergreens remain actively functional throughout more than just one growing season. So we think about our common garden plants that are non-evergreen, our deciduous allies. They are growing maybe for half the year or for 1 or 2 seasons in most places in the world. The evergreens, they don't really pay attention to the calendar. They do what they want. They stay vibrant and active throughout the entire year. They tend to hang out in places that are a little warm, a little arid. And the interesting thing that I find about these guys is they tend to show up in places where the soil's not that great and there's not a ton of water available. They're incredibly resourceful. They have figured out ways to thrive in places where other plants and other trees might really struggle. So just that aspect of the evergreen spirit tells us a lot about some of the medicine that they bring to us, about survival and thriving and getting through times when maybe we don't have the resources that we would like to have. And I love to talk about evergreens in the winter anyway, but I thought that given sort of the state of the world these days, these would be a really particularly poignant discussion and plant to bring in. The other cool thing about evergreens is their leaf biomass. So sort of how much matter makes up the tree is oftentimes many times greater than our standard deciduous trees, or trees that are not evergreens. And so they're very dense. They hold a lot of space. They're very strong. They kind of command our attention and our awareness. And for that reason, I think we have become somewhat enamored with them and fascinated with them. And this is why there's so much lore, as you'll see when we get into it, surrounding so many of our evergreen allies. So I wanted to start by talking about how all of the evergreens have some things in common. And this is really interesting. And I have in the past ended with this, but I thought it would be fun to start with it so that as we're going through and meeting these individual evergreen allies, we can consider how they share things in common, that there's a commonality of being evergreen, of having all of these virtues and these abilities to survive and thrive in challenging spaces and during times of year like the winter, when there's not much water available and not much sun and it's very, very cold. So some of the virtues that you will find repeated as we go through our 5 allies today. First, evergreens offer this sort of spirit of hope and promise. They are thriving and green and alive in the dead of winter. And it reminds us in some small way that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how cold it gets, no matter how far removed we may be from these feelings of abundance and thriving and fecundity and fertility and all the things we think about when we think about plants, it will come back around. Here where I am in the high desert, all of the trees are bare. All of the plants have died back. The skies are gray. The soil is brown and gray with a permafrost coating. But the evergreens are there, standing, bright, vibrant green amidst a gray, drab background. And so they are a symbol of hope and a promise that the will of the year, the seasons will continue to change and dance and go around in their cycles as they always have. And that we can, to some degree, trust that and lean into it and really be part of it, which I think is important. The other thing that you'll see really repeated throughout our discussion today is this idea of purification, that so much of the lore and the traditional applications of our evergreen allies talk about purifying spaces, purifying people, cleansing the body, cleansing the tissues. Evergreen allies being burned, to fumigate or purify a space, being strewn on the floor to soak up and mop up the miasma or the toxic energies from a sick room, being taken sometimes internally to help cleanse and detoxify the tissues of the body. So they are purifiers and cleansers, and we will spend a lot of time talking about that as we move on because it's an important part of our work. And finally, they are protective. We see so much lore, so much traditions of use around the evergreens being plants of protection. We can think about the doctrine of signatures of our evergreen allies, that a lot of them are very, I get some pine here, very pokey and spiky. They make fantastic protective spaces for birds and other animals because of that sort of protective spikiness. We think about holly with its sharp leaves. And so there is this natural sense of protection that comes from the evergreens. And as we get into some of the allies we'll be talking about in depth today, you'll see some of the specific applications for the protective energy of evergreen. But in my opinion, in my experience, no matter where you are in the world, because again, I chose 5 today, and I think some folks will be in places where maybe none of these 5 evergreens are, native to where you live or are grown where you live. You can creatively apply a lot of what we talk about today to any of the evergreen trees that grow near you. Now, when we get to the internal applications, the medicinal, that's not the case. We want to make sure we're working with the right plant for the right job. But the spiritual medicine, the ritual medicine of the evergreens is an invitation to a bioregional relationship with the plants, to connect with the plants and the trees that grow where you grow, that live where you live, that share the land and the soil and the seasons that you also experience. So evergreens are fun to talk about because they are all over the world in one way or another. So even if we don't get to talk about evergreens that you can apply a lot of this general evergreen spirit information to the evergreens in your life. So let us get into some evergreens. So first I want to start with pine, one of my favorites. And we are specifically today talking about white pine, which I think Pinus strobus. And I think for the folks in the UK, I believe this pine is generally referred to as the Weymouth pine. I could be mistaken, but Pinus strobus is the scientific there. There are about 150 species of pine worldwide, which is a lot. It is the largest family of conifer trees. And I am a real language nerd, a real etymology geek. I like to figure out how the plants get the names that we call them. There's oftentimes a lot of really interesting story when we dig into why do we call pine trees pine trees? And in this case, our common word for pine comes from the ancient Proto-Indo-European language word pite, which was their word for resin, which makes sense because we know the pine trees create that nice, sticky, fragrant, generally medicinal resin. From there, it moved through the Latin, becoming pinus, and we now generally just call them pine. So the tallest known pine in the world is around 268 feet. It's a ponderosa pine in Oregon, here in the States. They are known to live up to 5,000 years, but most of the pines that you and I might encounter are probably capping out at around 900 to 1,000 years of age, kind of depending on their species and also how well they're maintained and where they're growing. Pines are monoecious, and we're going to be using 2 really cool botanical terms today, monoecious and dioecious. Monoecious means that both the female and the male reproductive organs exist on the same tree. So pines are sort of these little self-contained microcosms, these little universes where the pollinators, and more commonly with pine, the wind, can move through, and the pine can reproduce on its own body without necessarily having to share genetic material with other pines. It's really a testament to how prolific they are and how powerful they are when they establish a stand somewhere. The branches, the needles, and the cones, I'm going to get back to my little pine here. They do grow in spirals. They grow in spirals that align to the Fibonacci sequence, which is very interesting. They are native to the Northern Hemisphere, but you can find pines pretty much everywhere in the world at this point, either because they are indigenous to those places, they've become nativized to those places, or people are working with them for gardening and landscaping. So pines are also a very interesting ally in the sense that when we look at the trees that grow in the hottest places in the world and in the coldest places in the world, one thing they tend to have in common is that they generally are pine. So these pine trees are incredibly adaptable. They're dynamic and resilient. They can show up in these bioregions and atmospheres that other plants they can't do it. So that's a little botany. When we get into the medicinal applications of pine, today we are specifically, again, focusing on that Pinus strobus, the white pine or the Weymouth pine. There are, again, many species of pines, and not all of them are, really interchangeable medicinally. So we want to make sure with the pines that we're understanding which species we're working with to ensure that the medicine is good for us and that it's going to be worked with appropriately. This is a small selection of some of my favorite ways to work with pine. And again, it's always a challenge for me to narrow down a list of things that I love about a plant to make it somewhat palatable and digestible. But here are a few. As a stimulating expectorant, pine needles taken in a hot tea. I like it very, very hot, very well steeped. You want to steep these needles for 20 to 30 minutes covered. Trap all of that pitch, the resin, the essential oil, the volatile oil, all of that good medicine that's in the pine. You want to really lock that into that hot water. So keep it covered while it's steeping. And this really helps stimulate the lungs. It gets blood moving around. It gets the lung tissue kind of astringed and toned so that it's easier for the body to cough stuff up. So when we get towards the end of winter, like we are now, and some of us get these, sort of boggy, stuck conditions in the lungs, and we're kind of coughing and we feel some weight in there. We feel some stuff rattling around. Pine needle tea is incredible to just stimulate the lungs and get everything up and out. As a demulcent, pine kind of helps to coat and soothe and lubricate most all of the mucous membranes throughout the body, but especially that upper respiratory system. So while you're drinking that tea to cough stuff up out of your lungs, as unromantic as that may be, you're also simultaneously soothing all of the tissue. So you don't end up with that, very raw throat from all the coughing and hacking. Pine kind of helps us cleanse and soothe at the same time. As a diuretic, which is any of our herbal allies that help increase the output of urine. There's many different ways they do that, but pine does it by gently irritating the kidney, the bladder, the ureters, so that the body is more encouraged to stimulate and produce urine. So it's an incredible way to help cleanse and purify the kidneys, the bladder, the urinary tract system. I work with pine a lot for UTIs, for inflammation in the kidneys, for bogginess or stagnation in the urinary tract. And for folks who haven't had the pleasure of pine needle tea, let this be an invitation to make it happen. It is so delightful. It has, of course, that expected piney taste, but there's also a bright, citrusy, kind of acidic aspect to it, thanks to all of the vitamin C content, that makes it just incredible. I like to do a pine needle tea with rose hips, and that's it. Pine needles and rose hips, incredible. Pine needles are systemically astringent. So again, they will tighten and tone the tissue, making it harder for bacteria to colonize on tissues, especially in the urinary tract system. So again, a fantastic occasional ally for folks who deal with bladder infections, kidney issues, UTIs, and all of that. Lungs with a cough due to cold, It's going to open them up and keep things moving upward and outward so that we don't have everything settle in the lungs and become problematic. I love to do a very light pine needle and juniper berry, which we'll also talk about juniper today. Pine needle and juniper balm with olive oil, a little bit of coconut oil, and some beeswax for folks who struggle with eczema and psoriasis. You can make a beautiful fragrant oil infusion for a topical support to help kind of dry out and draw out those kind of plaquey buildups. And it's incredibly effective. Very, very cleansing and purifying. Addresses not only the topical expression of eczema and psoriasis, but also leans into blood purification, which is generally the root of where some of those things come from. And last but not least, pine is incredibly antiseptic and disinfectant. So this affects the physical level and the spiritual level, which we will see time and time again, that these evergreens are used to cleanse and purify and disinfect a space. Pine can be made into a strong tea, which can be used to wash floors and walls in a sick room after someone's been sick. You can use pine essential oil in homemade cleansing products. Adding a little bit of pine to a bath can be just a lovely way to feel cleansed and purified. And so again, just a few of my faves. I know we're moving through quickly, but we have a lot to cover. I want to introduce you to lots today. So we're gonna go through it. When it comes to the magico ritual applications of pine, they're gonna mirror the medicinal, as they tend to do. So for cleansing, I love to dry and burn small bits of pine indoors, fumigating the space, fumigating my body with the smoke to purify and cleanse, to release, to let go of heaviness, of stagnation. This is a really lovely ritual after somebody's been sick or after they've gone through, something challenging and they kind of just want to let go of the heaviness. This is a really lovely and simple ritual that you can do with pine. Strewing practices, which I love for purification. And strewing, you're basically just taking one or two handfuls of pine needles. They've fresh or dried, and you're kind of sprinkling them all over your floors in your house. Literally, you get to make a little bit of a mess, have some fun with it. And you do that with the intention and maybe some prayer to the pine spirit, asking that they will absorb and soak up all of the negativity, the illness, the toxicity of the space. And then in a very kind of confident and strong and authoritative way, you sweep all of those needles right out the front door, move it out of your house, get it out of your life, send it back to the earth where it can be neutralized and composted and broken down, right? So a lovely practice that really can be good with pretty much any of the more medicinally active pines. Warding, we love to make wreaths with pine. We'll talk about this when we get into holly as well. Hanging pine during this time of year comes from our ancient traditions of warding, meaning protecting the home, protecting the barn, protecting the family, protecting the business. Hanging an evergreen wreath, especially when it's constructed to go in a clockwise spiral on the front door, brings those protective, purifying qualities of pine to the entire home. So this is one of the roots of our pine wreath traditions, our Holley Wreath traditions, and one that I continue to do and find incredibly effective. We can do magics of fertility, whether that's the fertility of procreation or the fertility of creativity and art and manifesting and problem solving by working with the cones, which are the female reproductive part of the pine. And pine is an incense. I love to connect to the old forest deities when you're working with Cernunnos and Pan and the Green Man and all of these deities that we associate with the forest. This is a fantastic incense to burn in honor of them, to connect to their spirits. So I want to share this recipe with you. You're welcome to screen capture this, or I will, the kind folks at Association of Master Herbalists will be sending you an email with this slide in there. So don't feel like you have to write this down in a hurry. This is a recipe for a sweet pine cordial, and it's very simple. You can work with any of the safe to consume evergreens that are around you. You just need some water and some sugar and some alcohol. It's very simple. And this cordial can be sipped on warm, I think is really lovely, in a little port glass or in a little shot glass. You really just want to take about 1 ounce to 2 ounces at a time. That's a good therapeutic dose. One of my favorite things to do is to make this, keep it in the fridge, get it cold, and add ounces of it to sparkling water. So I'll just get the plain San Pellegrino or Perrier and add 1 ounce or 2 of this in with the sparkling water to make a sparkling pine cordial. It's incredible. It's just incredibly rich in vitamin C, vitamin A, and you're getting that pine citrusy flavor. Serve this to people, they'll have no idea what they're drinking, and then you tell them it's pine, and they're very impressed. This is how to win the party when parties are a thing again. So we're going to move on now to Holley. And Holley, Ilex aquifolium, is a genus of plants that has over 550 species. This is a massive, massive genus of plants. And within the Holley genus, we have a lot of unexpected friends that you might be familiar with, including yerba mate and yaupon, which are 2 really celebrated herbs for drinking, high in caffeine. So there's a lot of caffeine alkaloid content in these Holley plants. They tend to live in temperate and subtropical regions globally, but you will find them other places as well. Like here where I live, we actually have some Holley. People have to grow them on purpose, but we do have them. They're very simple. As you can see in the picture there, spiny leaves. There's little thorns on there that'll get you if you're not careful. And the Holley flowers are beautiful and tiny and sort of modest. And I really look forward to them flowering. These guys are dioecious, which means that each Holley plant either contains male reproductive or female reproductive. So you need more than one Holley to reproduce, which is why they tend to grow in stands. And the berries, which are actually called drupes, ripen in the winter. So this is interesting. We think about most berries ripening in late summer or early summer. These ripen in the winter and provide vibrant color when most of the plants around us are in dormancy. So we get these incredible pops of red amid the gray skies and the snowy background if you live somewhere with snow. And they're really just such a treat. Here where I live, Holley really provides some of the only color that we see coming from the plant world at this time of year. So we very much appreciate them showing up for us to give us a little warmth, a little color in the winter. Some of the lore surrounding Holley is the Druids held that Holley protected against evil spirits and wore Holley in their hair in order to protect themselves from those same spirits. In some traditions of modern craft, Holley represents the wintertime face of the horned god. He defeats the Oak King and reigns through the dark half of the year, then is defeated himself by the Oak King, who thus reigns for the bright half of the year. So Holley participates in this idea of the year having a bright half and a dark half, and there being this constant pattern, a change moving from one to the other. Holley leaves kept indoors over the winter provide safety to the good folk, the Fae, who would reward the householder for their kindness. So it's good to keep a little bundle of Holley hung inside your front door or set next to a hearth or fireplace. They're famous for having a resistance to lightning. And this actually does trickle into the botany a bit, that Holley, even when they grow very, very tall and are the taller tree or shrub in an area, are very unlikely to be struck by lightning. The lightning is more apt to choose a different tree, even if that tree is less tall. So because of that, Holley has now become celebrated not only as an ally to protect us from thunder and lightning, being hung in barns and in homes to protect from thunder and lightning, but also having it be related to the deities and old gods that are related to thunder, like Odin and Perquenos. So Holley is one of the alphabets, one of the letters in the ancient Irish Ogham script, Tine, and it translates to ingot or metal, which talks about how incredibly hot the holly wood burns. So if you were to use dried wood from the holly tree in a fire, it burns incredibly hot and actually takes on the appearance of molten lead. It's just very bright and an immense amount of heat. So a lot of times when people work with the Ogham as divination, Holley will talk about resilience and strength, fortitude, and kind of making it through tough times with the strength of lead, but also with that power of the red berries surviving through the winter. We also see in a lot of the traditional images of Father Time and Father Christmas wearing a crown of holly as a meditation on the hidden life, the hidden power within the darkness of wintertime. Medicinally, holly berries and leaves are incredibly toxic. Again, when we're talking about this particular variety of holly, and they should not be consumed. They're bad for humans and for animals, so it's best to grow them in areas where they can be respected. So we reserve holly medicine for spiritual level of work, meaning that we're maybe carrying them in a sachet or hanging them on the door as a ward or a talisman of protection, but never, having them directly on the skin or ingesting this particular type of holly directly. There is a lot of lore that surrounds tucking a couple of leaves of holly underneath your pillow during the winter time when holly is sort of at their most active to induce deep winter-like sleep. So to help us align to the ways of winter, to do what the plants do in the winter, which is rest. So if you're one of those folks who winter comes around and you get a little stir crazy, try to bring some holly medicine into your pillowcase and see if they help. I would suggest putting it on the underside of the pillowcase because those spines are a force to be reckoned with. That is not how you want to wake up in the morning. And some of our magical applications, holly wreaths winding in a clockwise circle, just like the pine, can be crafted at autumntide and then hung on the doors to keep the cold out. And we're talking here about literal cold, right? Keeping the house warm and inviting and welcoming. But also we're talking about the energetic of coldness, feeling stuck, frozen, disconnected, cut off. And I think, again, the way of the world these days, a lot of us are feeling that way. So I think holly with their fiery leaves and their bright red berries can be an incredible ally for us to call in to get through what we're getting through right now. Holly can be carried in a little sachet or bundle as a protective amulet. The boughs can be hung in barns or on sheds to ward off lightning, which is nice. Again, leaves under the pillow for deep sleep and prophetic dreams. And there's a lot of lore about collecting dew caught on the leaves of holly and adding just a few drops of that dew to a baby's bath to protect them. And a lot of that lore centers on specifically protecting the babies from being taken or from being took by the good folk, by the neighbors. So it's very wrapped up in fairy lore, not only as a plant of protection for the fae, but also as an apotropaic ally to help us not incur some of their mischievous pastimes. So if you decide to do a holly wreath, what I like to do is construct it, again, moving in a clockwise circle. As shown, you can use wire, or sometimes you can find at craft stores little round forms that you can build this around while it's fresh and supple. And before I hang the holly on the doors, I will put a candle in the center and sort of have that be the ritual of meditating on holly, holding light and warmth, brightness and strength throughout the cold winter months. And then the candle can be kept inside to continue that magic throughout the winter. And then the wreath itself can be hung on your front door for protection. And they do stay very pretty for a very long time. You can take them down once a week and soak them in water and they'll kind of revivify a little bit, but I really like how they look as they dry. I think they have a really interesting way of drying up and maintaining their color. So a great thing to play with if you've got access to a holly near you. So let's move on to ivy. Another plant that I find people think of unexpected as an evergreen, but an evergreen nonetheless. This is Hedera Helix, or the traditional English ivy. 12 to 15 species of evergreen climbing or creeping plants. So some of the ivy, as I think most people are familiar with, will climb up trees or trellises or the side of a wall. Other ivies kind of mound and creep along the ground. There's not really a rhyme or reason to species of how they do that. It really does feel like they kind of do what works best for the particular bioregion. The fruits ripen in late winter, so this kind of has some similarity with holly, or very early spring. And they produce nectar at a time of the year when pretty much no other plants are doing so. As a first food, as an early spring food for our pollinators, our insects that are kind of just waking up from their winter hibernation, ivy is incredibly important. So they not only provide food, but for folks who are familiar with ivy, when they mound up, there really are kind of like a dense forest in and of themselves. And inside of that dense forest, many birds make their nests, many small animals, mammals, rodents live in there, tons of insects. They're really a paradise for spiders. So I consider a good mound of ivy to be an offering to the spirits of place, an offering to the non-human people that we share space with, the animals and insects, creating a little hostel, a little housing space for them to call their own. Ivy is also part of the own script, Gort, and it reminds us that we're never alone. Ivy is a plant of binding and of bringing together. So I think that right now, a very good ally to work with. The Romans wore crowns of ivy to prevent drunkenness. I have not tested this personally, but if you have, I would love to hear your stories. They're used to advertise pubs and inns when wrapped around poles or posts, mostly in Britain, in the UK. Ivy clings to dead trees and thrives on the composting matter at the base, making them a powerful symbol of life from death. And it is understood more often than not that when an ivy is climbing up around a tree, that it is strangling the tree, or kind of it's going to cause problems. And that is actually not always the case. There can be relationships of symbiosis between ivy and trees. That is not always the case, but more often than not, everything is okay. And they do represent that cyclicality of life, which is really what a lot of their magical lore comes from. They tend to show up in graveyards and in abandoned places, kind of showing how nature takes back over the areas when humans abandon those areas, which I think is very interesting. And because they cling and bind, they are considered a powerful symbol of marriage, of friendship, of hand fastings. And we'll come back to this when we get into the magical section, because there's some applications there. Medicinally, ivy of this variety, the English ivy, is not part of the traditional British pharmacopoeia, but was part of the United States pharmacopoeia, which I found very interesting. It is popular as a homeopathic remedy for rheumatism and skin diseases, that homeopathic remedy being a preparation in such a high dilution that no real presence of the phytochemistry of ivy exists. It's more the energetic signature of ivy. Greaves, in her famous Materia Medica, mentions the disuse of ivy as a medicine, but that small and controlled doses of fresh leaf tincture act as a potent nervous system sedative. So we do have another ally in the Helix genus, the ground ivy, which is used a lot for this. But for this English ivy, it is pretty mixed when you look at traditional Materia Medica, traditional herbal traditions, whether it's safe or not, how effective it is. And I think that if somebody was going to work with a tincture of ivy, drop dosing, 1 to 3 drops maximum is probably the smart way to go. Often when it comes to these these allies that we don't have a clear indication for traditions of use or empirical evidence. It's generally that the difference between the toxicity and the medicine is just the amount of medicine taken, the dose. So if you choose to work with this one, start out very small. That's a very safe thing to do. Getting into the magic. I love ivy as binding magic. Use in place of cords or rope to bind two items together symbolically, again, used in the ritual of hand fasting, to wrap candles, to wrap spell items, charms, and all of that. I'll show you a photo here in a moment. They can be strewn just like the pine to remove negativity and call in good luck. So again, we're scattering them around the ground and then sweeping them out with intention to carry away all ill. They are a natural amulet for fertility. So the ivy leaf can be tucked into the pocket, tucked under the mattress, or carried in a sachet. They very much symbolize wealth and abundance, especially when we find them growing densely up the side of a wall of a home or a business. They really bring this just green, abundant, fertile energy to a space. And so there's no surprise there why so many folks love these, aside the fact they are incredibly beautiful as a wall trellis. And because ivy is a binding ally, growing in a clockwise direction and binding things, they're really good at helping us connect to our tribe, find our people, find new friends, new social outlets, new communities, connect to the places where we're going to feel welcomed and wanted and at home. And so it's really a beautiful ally. I know that some folks do a flower essence with ivy that really leans into that medicinal space. So that's another really great way to work with this plant. Here is a photo of ivy being used along with a ribbon to bind a ritual working, to bind something up. So this is a fantastic ally to bring in for these ritual applications and to use in place of cord or rope when the energy and the personality of ivy is right. Let's get into you. Conversation about evergreen would not be complete without you.
And Josh, just to let you know, there's sort of 15 minutes left coming up to 8 p.m. So I appreciate there are a few more to go through. So just to time check. Okay,
I think we'll probably finish right on time.
Perfect.
You, Taxus baccata, or the whole Taxus genus, really. Taxus genus shares the same linguistic root with toxic. So that's a good way to remember what you're dealing with you. Flat dark green leaves arranged in a spiral on the stem. The berries mature 6 to 9 months after pollination, so it's a long process, and they make just one seed each. The seeds are distributed exclusively by birds who eat them along with the berries. These guys are dioecious, so again, we have male plants and female plants. It is believed that the yew trees last forever. They live forever because they continue to grow out of their old decay. But generally, and from the botanical standpoint, they have about a 400 to 600 year lifespan. But I definitely prefer that eternal yew lore more. I think it makes sense, and it reminds us of really a lot of yew's medicine. The canopy of yew grows fast and stays the same size. The trunk can continue to grow from itself and can survive when hollow due to fungal attacks. So a lot of yew trees are actually hollow on the inside, which is pretty incredible considering they're supporting a very biomass heavy canopy. Another from the ancient Irish Ogham script, speaking about rebirth that follows death, which is very much a consistent theme in yew. This is a superior tree wood for making bows with a little magical kick. It's preferred among all other woods for magical wands due to its association with life and death, with eternality, and that sort of polarity of the longevity of yew and the toxicity of yew, life and death combined in one plant. It's believed that especially throughout Britain, where yews are an important cemetery and graveyard ally, that the roots reach down and touch every single corpse buried in the cemetery. So when we sit with a yew tree, sort of spiritually, energetically, we are connecting to all of our good dead, all of our ancestors. They can be incredibly hallucinogenic for some people, especially on very hot days when the sun is kind of releasing the internal toxicity of the leaves. It is believed by some botanists that the lore of Odin hanging from the yew tree to receive the gift of the runes plays into this hallucinogenic aspect of yew, which I think is very important. As far as medicine goes, this is not a medicinal plant in our standard way of working with medicine. It's toxic. Do not ingest. Don't rub on the skin. Don't inhale. Even when pruning and cutting down yew, we want to stay protected and make sure there is some wiggle room with certain parts of the flesh of the berry. But for our purposes today, we're going to say that yew is toxic and not a plant that we work with internally. For magic, again, ancestral work, connecting to our mighty dead, sitting with yew connects us to all those who are in the land, all of those who have been interred and have been passed through. Tools of life and death, wand and staff, that connect the poles, connect the polarities. Yew does remain toxic even after it's dried. So be mindful when doing, staffs or tools with yew wood that they do need to be coated with beeswax or varnish to prevent you from soaking anything up. And here is one of my ancestral shrines at home, and you can see that I have a bundle of yew wood that I keep with the ancestors to help connect us. And we're going to move right on because we're running short to one of probably my favorite of the evergreen allies, which is Juniperus species. There are over 60 of them, almost all of them in the Northern Hemisphere, from the Arctic to Africa. This is one of the highest elevation growing plants in the world. They can be monoecious or dioecious. One cool thing about juniper, the berries are actually not berries, they are cones, but as they're growing, the scales fuse together with this kind of waxy coating to protect them. And so we do call them berries, but they're actually cones. They're a reproductive organ. The juniper will release pollen several times a year, including in the middle of winter and early spring. So again, very important food, especially for butterflies. There are some species of butterflies and moths that prefer to feed exclusively on juniper. They are gymnosperms, which means that they create seeds with no fruits and no flowers, which is very interesting. They have about a 200 to 300 year lifespan, with some not beginning to seed until after they're 10 years old. And they are one of the first trees to move into the British Isles over 12,000 years ago, after that last ice age retreated back. Again, the soil not in such great shape after the ice age, but the junipers came in and colonized that area and started breaking that sub-ice soil up and giving it nutrients and nitrogen, making it fertile for what was to come. And here in the slide, you can see I've got an arrow pointing at the female cone, which we call the Juniper berry, and then an arrow pointing at the little brown male cone. And if we were to blow that up, you would see that it looks very similar to most other cones of trees that are in the cypress family, like juniper is. So they're just tiny little cones. For lore, consistently associated with the element of fire, this is a tree of heat and transformation and power. They're traditionally worked with to protect property and bring back that which is stolen. We see that time and time again, from the British Isles all the way to Pennsylvania Dutch magic, that juniper will get back what has been taken from you. In Greece, juniper is burnt for purification. In Egypt, also burnt to purify spaces for their embalming rituals. Scotland, burnt to protect livestock from diseases. In the Scottish Highlands, burnt indoors as a seining smoke on New Year's Day to purify and protect, kind of open everything up for the new year ahead. The Siberian Tungus shamans burn to purify offerings before those offerings are given to the spirits to make sure they're nice and clean. Charles Leland mentions in his Gospel of Aradia that the Etruscans carried juniper berries to ward off the malefic influence of witches. So again, so much about protection and purification time and time again with these allies. In Cornwall and Brittany, we see the Beltane fires being lit with juniper, the livestock being driven between those two fires to purify and bless them. In England, the twigs and needles were traditionally burned in a sick room to keep viruses and pathogens down. In Wales, anyone who fells a juniper will be dead within a year. So keep that in mind if you plan on cutting one down. Newfoundland juniper repels bears and wolves. So a lot of fences around livestock areas are made from juniper wood so that the wolves and bears don't come in and cause problems. And another bit of lore that I think is very fascinating, in Iceland, juniper and rowan grown together, both being very fiery trees, is a recipe for fire. If you have a juniper and rowan growing together, you're kind of asking for it. So they're kept separately and never brought into the house together. Medicinally, gin, of course, is made from juniper berries. We actually get the name juniper and gin from the old French name for this tree, Ginevra. It's an antivenom for snakes, both an antivenom literally for snakes, and I also will work with this for spider bites, but also, figuratively, that helps purge and detoxify and purify. Stimulating diuretic, much like pine, that purifies the tissues of the bladder and the urinary tract. Helps with damp, stagnant respiratory issues, very similar to pine. I like to work with juniper berries only. All of this, by the way, is specific to the berry, not the leaf. Juniper berries in a respiratory steam. So you're bringing water to a simmer, you're throwing a handful of berries in there, and you're just kind of gently inhaling that steam to get in and break up phlegm and mucus in the lungs and help it come out. We can infuse the berries into oil with other herbs for eczema and psoriasis. I mentioned earlier, I like the juniper berries with the white pine needles. Fantastic for brain, nervous system, and eyesight, taking small amounts of juniper berry tincture. Fantastic to lower blood sugar levels and help with pancreatic function. For fluid buildup around the heart or lungs, incredible diuretic. I like to pair with hawthorn to kind of drain all of that excess dampness buildup through the process of urination. And juniper, this is my juniper soapbox, really underappreciated as a carminative. I want to see more people putting juniper berries in their digestive bitters. I make a purifying digestive bitter that's so juniper heavy, people think it's made with gin. So incredible for warming and stimulating and purifying the digestive tract, just what we want from medicinal bitters. For magic, protection from enchantment and witchcraft, see that time and time again. Carry as a sachet or as an amulet. Smolder the leaves to purify a space. Protect property and land and livestock with bonfires. Smolder the leaves and the berries to cleanse toxicity, illness, and negativity. This is really my go-to ally for cleansing a space with smoke. You can use the berries in a bathtub to do a wash or a bath for protection. Again, like pine, burn as an incense to invoke the old forest deities. Fantastic for chasing out the old, as we see in Scotland, where it's a saning herb on New Year's Day. Get rid of the old year, the old patterns, the old habits. Helps kind of carry that and wash that away with the smoke. And then carry as a sachet for purification and protection. And I may have mentioned juniper is probably my closest evergreen ally. I wear a bit of juniper wood around my neck. I love this tree so much. And again, I love to burn the dried juniper leaves, incredibly fragrant, very astringent and evergreen smelling. You can kind of just light them, put them out, and let the smoke carry away and purify. I think the next slide on the left, this is a picture from my altar at home. On the left, you have a little terracotta icon of juniper and a sachet that I carry around in my pocket, which is stuffed with the roots, bark, berries, cones, and leaves of the juniper, because this is one of my close plant friends. And that is it. We made it on time somehow. So much. This is like 4 hours of content crammed into one 1 hour. I want to say before we get too close to the end that watch your email. We will be sending you out these slides because I know we moved through it so fast. So I want you to be able to go back through at your leisure and really absorb the information. And we're also sending all of you a digital copy of this Juniper Journey booklet, which will guide you into some rituals and some medicine making and some meditations with Juniper. And so that will also be included. And again, all the recipes and whatnot will be in the slides. And before we get to our Q&A time, I did write this book. It is out in the UK. It is not out in the States yet. So if you are in the States, please hold off. Don't order this through Aeon because it'll take a long time to get here. We will have it here at stateside very soon. When we can thank the paper and ink shortage for that. But if you're in the UK, this is available now. If you buy from aeonbooks.co.uk and use the SP20 code at checkout, you'll get 20% off. And the book is really a labor of love for me. It's about working with the plants in a medicinal way, with more relationship, with more spirit, with more personal connection, which I think is very much missing from a lot of the ways that we do plant medicine. So if you liked any of the content today, pick up the book. It's out there. There's another one on the way. There's where to find me online and all that. I'd love for you to join me. I'm very active on Instagram and on YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel with lots of free classes. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Josh. We will get to questions, but just to let you know what's happening in the chat, so many people are just saying thank you so much. Sinead said, love this talk. Thank you so much. Can't wait to get out tomorrow and start foraging. Rachel says, wonderful, so exciting. Jill says she loves Juniper so much, so very timely. So yeah, just really lots of love for your talk. And I echo that because the depth and mystery and magic of all of them, and as you said, in such an hour I feel like we've gone on such a journey with these.
We hit it hard. Everyone did a very good job. I'm proud of everybody. We really crammed it in.
So I will get started on the questions for you, as we've had a few come up. So I'll go back to the beginning, and obviously everyone, recording will be sent, slides will be sent, Juniper book will be sent. So if you have to jump off, don't sweat. Okay, so Roses has asked, which cultural traditions are you drawing on for your lore and spiritual associations?
So pretty much exclusively the Pan-Celtic, and I'm trying to move away from that word, but lots of Irish lore, especially, old fairy faith lore, lots of Scottish plant medicine lore, of course, much British, a little bit of Pan-European stuff where I can find it. I definitely love looking into Italian medicinal lore just because it's so well preserved. Some of the Romano, Greco, early pagan stuff is also very beautifully preserved, thanks to Pliny and some of the other early herbalists. Occasionally we, through linguistics, like with pine, we can go back to some of the early stories or some of the early linguistic trails anyway that lead from the Proto-Indo-Europeans, which is a wild and mind-racking journey. But that part of the world, mostly because that's my ancestral heritage, but also it's what I love. I love the stories, I love the fairy tales, I love the myths, and I'm very much inspired by all of that. So that's pretty much where all comes from. And if it's not from there, I'm generally pretty clear about saying if I'm, sharing information from an indigenous tradition, which I try not to do, and lots of what I call green gnosis. 20 years of working with the plants, they've taught me a lot of things, and that's the stuff I like to share the most, that the living tradition, the living wisdom that the plants are here, and they're still talking, and they're still teaching, and they're still helping us write our traditions all the time, every day.
Wow, I love that, the green gnosis. I'm guessing in your book you obviously will be referring to those throughout sort of the actual spiritual herbalism book. So if we're interested in that side, that will be in the book.
Yes, very much so.
Brilliant. Sarah has just asked, sorry for stupid question, no stupid questions. Can we use any pine, or are there certain pines to avoid?
So I would stick to pine that we have, good relationships with. I don't know that I've encountered any true pines that are, toxic, but some of them do have higher contents of turpentine, and turpentine-like substances that can be very inflammatory for some people's bodies, can be a little hard for the system to handle. So stick to, pines that we have worked with consistently. See who grows where you live. Check and double check, and try to find references to individual species in monographs and materia medica and herb books. For me, especially in the States, and I also think in kind of the greater United Kingdom, the white pine seems to be the most consistent, but there are definitely others. Because pine is such a big genus, I'm hesitant to want to dial it in too tight, because I don't want to dissuade anybody from working with a pine that I don't know. But I also want everyone to be cautious. So yeah, I think that's the best we can do in like a broad way, to keep everybody safe.
Great. And Dee has said, yes, redwood. Does it matter if it is coastal redwood or not?
I don't think so. All of the redwood medicine I've taken I had some beautiful redwood oxymel, which was harvested from Humboldt County. So I think the coastal redwood is incredibly medicinal, and that's where a lot of the tradition comes from. Redwood specifically, I've never heard it being problematic. Again, small doses, make sure you know who you're working with for sure. But redwood medicine is like very much a trip in the ancient energy of the tree spirits. That medicine really makes you feel just how much wisdom and how much the trees have seen, kind of moves through your body. So thanks for bringing up redwood. I actually wish we could have gotten redwood and cedar, so many other ones in today, but we barely made it. So I'm glad I stopped at pine.
So Carolyn, on the pine, I'm guessing the pine needle tea, she's asked, what would a child's dose be for tea? Do you water down the usual tea, or is it okay, the same?
I would say if they're under, 100 or 90 pounds, I would go towards like a third of a standard adult dose, which to me is about a tablespoon. It's hard to quantify. When we do pine needles, I'll literally just break off a few bundles and throw that in, and it's probably not a super strong cup, but I feel like it's enough. So, kids with tea under 100 or 90 pounds, I would give them a third of a standard dose. Once they're above 100 pounds, you can get closer to half a standard adult dose. And then as they're grown, a full dose. And for me, that grownness is more about somebody being able to express how an herb feels in their body. You might have a kid that's 100 pounds, but they're not at a place yet where they can say, oh, this felt very drying to me, or I felt like it overstimulated my lungs. We want to be able to get that feedback from them to know. So just low dose them. It's so rich in vitamins that even a nod towards a pine tea is giving you more than 5 oranges. So I think it's great for kids, and they generally love that taste as well.
Amazing. So Laura's asked, for folks that can't have alcohol, and I think this is for the sweet pine cordial, what could be used instead? Maybe apple cider vinegar?
Apple cider vinegar would be fantastic. You could also consider doing a pine needle oxymel, where you're going to, instead of doing any heat, you're going to soak the pine needles in some good apple cider vinegar for a few weeks. Then you're going to strain them out and sort of cut that with some honey. And it's just really beautifully preserved, and you're getting a nice apple cider vinegar kick, some sweet, ideally local honey. You could also theoretically preserve a cordial with some honey or with some vegetable glycerin. It will be incredibly sweet. And so maybe you would want to just leave the sugar out entirely at that point. But I think an oxymel would be a good alternative.
And Tyson's asked about American holly. 2 questions. I would say it has a less spiny leaf. Is that safe to ingest? But then asking about holly having a high caffeine content, but we can't access it orally. Yes.
Yeah, don't ingest holly at all. If you want to work with holly medicine, yerba mate or yaupan are they're interestingly only 2 South Central North American plants that contain caffeine. So that's kind of interesting. So that's the holly direction if you want to ingest, and even those are very drying and intense. So I tell people you got to be, gentle with the yerba mates a lot. I don't know how people do it. I tried yerba mate one time and I was climbing the walls. So I don't know how people drink it all day, but that's how you can work with holly.
Fab. And Naomi's asked, would you be able to comment on any scientific evidence for the believed properties of holly? Well, she said she struggles to understand how holly could ward off lightning strikes.
That comes straight from the lore, and it also comes from some botanical surveys that I found in my notes years ago. I could probably dig them back up for you. That when we're looking at lightning strike tree preferences, that holly is not among it, but the empirical evidence is definitely there. The lore is definitely there for holly being a tree the lightning doesn't touch. And so we kind of pull that in as a charm against, or an aperture peg defense against that.
Yeah, I've definitely read that too. I think you'd be able to Google it because I think there's something about it being conduct or something like that. Yeah. It's definitely a fact. Scientifically as well. So Kirsten, oh no, I've skipped that. Natalie has asked, is holly from the same family as wintergreen?
As what? Sorry?
Wintergreen.
Not that I'm aware of. The wintergreen that we work with, which is people will call Vicks plant here, is, I believe, not. That being said, wintergreen, there's also a variety of mentha that people call wintergreen, which would be in the Lamiaceae family. So it's related to mint and lavender and rosemary and all those lovely plants. The issue that we run into with some of these kind of more folk names like wintergreen is there can be 3, 4, 5 different plants that people in different areas call wintergreen. So I'm not aware of it, and the wintergreen I know is a mint family plant, but it would definitely be worth triple checking before making tea from that wintergreen.
And Kirsten has asked, a standardized ivy medicine exists for coughs? I don't think that's a question. Or is it a question? It is made under the trademark Propsan and contains extract from dried leaf.
Yeah. That is true. And I think that is a species closer to the ground ivy than the English ivy, if I'm correct. I don't know that I'm trying to think if I've ever even seen that on the market, but I know of the product and I know of the idea, and I think it's fantastic. Ivy is so prolific. This is a great ally, not only because they're available throughout the winter time when people get coughs, but it's a plant that very hard to over harvest. They're very, very prolific.
So Natalie has asked, where we live, we have ash juniper trees, Juniperus ashae, but often misnamed cedar trees. We have male pollen producing and female berry bearing trees, but they are still classified as evergreens. So is there such a thing as a dioecious evergreen trees?
There definitely is within the genus, for sure. And that you bring up a really good point, that even in the American market, a great number of furniture pieces that are sold as cedar. We have a hope chest tradition here, where people will buy like a cedar chest to keep baby clothes and memories and things in, that the cedar is supposed to keep out moths and bugs. more often than not, those are actually made from juniper, the Juniperus communalis, or Juniperus osteosperma, than actual cedar. So it's very common for junipers to be mistaken as cedar. They have that cedar smell. They have that beautiful red heartwood color. They're very resinous, but they're their own person.
And Tyson has asked, tea with juniper or topical only? I don't know if that was reference to a specific condition or.
Berries only internally. We do have some situations where the leaves can be worked with internally, but that's tricky, and I would make sure you're working with someone qualified for that. But berries, fantastic. Leaves, topical, external, or through smoldering.
And scroll down, just Claire has said, are any juniper berries poisonous? I'm asking because in Turkey, a type of juniper grows and I wanted to make medicine, but I wasn't too sure. Yes, as above question, they also call it cedar locally. Sorry, I've lost track of that.
I don't know enough about the juniper that might be growing where you are to say safely. I would be surprised if there were toxic juniper berries. I know that, I wish I could remember the name, but there is a spice rub, a condiment that's made out of pulverized juniper, that I think comes from a Turkish varietal of juniper, but I don't feel confident enough to speak to what you have there for sure, but I would be surprised. I'm relatively certain if you do a little digging, you'll find you're okay.
Karen has asked, do you offer more in-depth classes?
Yes. If you go to my website, I've got a few courses online. I do teach a 9-week spiritual herbalism intensive twice a year here in Salt Lake. You have to come in person, but I am working on trying to slowly figure out how to get that online while keeping it in a nice way. I like to teach traditional style, teacher to student, in person. Books are great. And this book, the Spiritual Herbalism book, is to me considered a little bit of a 201. It's not a good introduction to herbalism. It's a great introduction to taking foundational herbalism deeper into the roots of where our plant medicine traditions come from, which is relationship. If there's something that you're interested or you'd like to see, let me know. And my YouTube channel, I do tons and tons of free classes, and I feel like a lot of them go pretty deep. So check it out. Let me know what you want to hear. I'll see what I can do for you.
I love this. Yeah, giving so much information, Josh. So great. So I'm just trying to pick out a few more questions. I think we've got a couple more. Will the recipe for the juniper pine cream ointment for skin eczema be in your book? Asks Fanny.
No, but if you send me an email, I'll send you an idea. To give you a brief, I like coconut oil for eczema and psoriasis. It feels like a better energetic fit. It's not comedogenic. It's not heavy like olive oil. So you could soak, a few bunches, just a few bundles of pine, and maybe a tablespoon or two of crushed juniper berries, and maybe some calendula flower as well, in a bit of coconut oil for a few weeks, keeping it somewhere warm so that oil stays liquid, and then strain it out. And then you're just going to use that oil cut with beeswax until you have the consistency that you want, or you might just keep it as oil. A lot of folks dealing with those kind of plaquey skin conditions find that oil feels better than a balm. It's lighter, it absorbs more quickly. So it can be just as simple as soaking them in some coconut oil for a few weeks, straining that out, and there you go. There you've got an infused oil that you can use. Again, we do one here in the shop that I call Dryad Oil that is for psoriasis, eczema, keratinosis, and it is white pine, juniper, reishi mushroom, calendula, rose, and burdock root. So I do throw some other allies in there to just really harmonize it, but you can keep it simple for sure.
And Amy has asked, Why would holly have need to protect itself if it is toxic to animals? Certainly here in the Scottish Highlands, the red deer love it, and so it grows spiky on the branches within reach of browsing, and then the leaves grow smoother when out of reach, suggesting it is very palatable.
Interesting. I'm not sure. I think the spiky, I mean, there's always going to be an animal that finds their way around. I mean, we have animals here that eat cactuses, so they will always find a way. But generally, that spikiness, I think for most, especially like soft snouted animals, is enough to put them off. And the toxicity is probably a generalization, that most animals like, and especially when we see that warning of toxicity for animals, it's generally related to our companion animals, cats and dogs. That this is not a plant that you want to have around if you've got a house cat or a dog that nips, and chews on leaves, like so many house plants. So I'm not surprised there are animals that can safely eat, but I would say, our more domesticated friends probably make sure they're kept away.
Amazing. So that is the end of our questions. So I'd love to leave it on Kaylee's note that she's just written saying, Josh, it's truly been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing your Instagram and YouTube videos and eventually reading your book when I'm able to get my hands on it here in the US. I've learned more in this hour than I have in ages. I really appreciate your time and knowledge.
Oh, thank you so much. How sweet.
Oh, and Isa, again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Truly beautiful and extremely inspirational. So there's a lot of love for you, Josh. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Obviously our Josh's book, everyone, don't forget, you can get the 20% discount with this code SP20. And also if you are in Europe, Melinda's just put, if you just email Aeon Books, here's their email, if you want to get hold of it. Obviously very easy in the UK, just head to the website, and hopefully you get some paper and ink in the US soon.
This was supposed to come out in November. The folks at Aeon have worked tirelessly to get this out, and it's like one thing after another, but I'm happy you guys have it. I hope you enjoy it. Let us know how it is.
Oh, amazing. Well, yes, I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a copy as well. I'm sure everyone is after this really exciting and inspirational talk. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you all that stayed on for the questions. And obviously you've got Josh's details if you want to stay in touch with him. He's just so abundant with all of the information he's sharing, and we'll probably get a recording out to you later this week, because the guy just edits it first, puts a little AMH logo on the front. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled on your inbox, and we'll be sending all this stuff your way. So thank you everyone so much for joining. It's just been a pleasure, Josh, and thank you for your time and connecting us with these incredible plants. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for everybody that is up early and staying up late. I very much appreciated seeing everybody's faces. So we'll stay in touch. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.